Greetings and welcome. This is Caroline Staten with Transition US, and I want to welcome the participants that are coming into this event today, and also our guest, and I'll tell you more about her shortly. And this call is sponsored by Transition US, and the main aim is to provide practical support to the leaders of transition initiatives, those who are starting an initiative, and community leaders across the country. And actually, we have participants from other countries often, but all of us who are working on building resilience within our communities. And we want to continue to offer these events at no cost, but do ask that you consider making a donation to transitionus.org. And thank you to those who are able to support us in that way. It really helps a lot. So without further ado, let me get into our topic today. It's scaling up community resilience in the shadow of Chevron. And our guest today is Doria Robinson of Urban Tilth. And Doria will be talking about the Urban Tilth model. It's a high-impact grassroots organization that builds resilience in Richmond, California. And Richmond is a very diverse community in the San Francisco Bay Area. And Urban Tilth hires and trains residents to work with schools, community-based organizations, government agencies, businesses, and individuals as they develop the capacity to produce 5% of the community's food supply. And Doria is going to tell us and walk us through this work that she's been doing since 2014. And Doria herself is a third-generation resident of Richmond, California. She's the executive director of Urban Tilth, and she was raised in a strong church community where her grandfather was the minister. And Doria spent weekends and summers on the church's 500-acre ranch in Fairfield, California. And that taught her a lot of lessons of cooperative economics that she learned from her grandfather. And she also worked on organic farms in western Massachusetts when she attended Hampshire College. And Doria is a certified permaculture designer, a gardener, a nutrition educator, and yoga instructor. And she's a blogger. She's involved with the Richmond Food Policy Council and a number of other things, which some of which she'll talk about today, a new initiative called Cooperation Richmond, for example. And then in 2014, Doria led the charge to develop Urban Tilth's first 3-acre urban farm in Richmond. And it's a relaunch of the farm-to-table countywide CSA. And it really focuses on hyper-local produce and has seeded the Richmond Food Policy Council's effort to install salad bars in every Richmond school in order to increase access for all Richmond kids to healthy, whole foods. So Doria, thank you so much for joining us today. And we have a nice, intimate group today. There's 8 of us on the call so far, and we likely will have some others joining us, but this is a great, intimate group. And Doria, I know you had some initial polling questions, and we'll start there. We'll go into the presentation, and again, people can open that. It takes a little bit time, a few seconds to open it, so get that ready if you can. So Doria, over to you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's really an honor to be here sharing our story. And yeah, I hope everyone gets out of this hour what they're really looking for. So kind of in order to try to understand who's on the call, I wanted to ask a couple of questions. The first one is just, do we have any farmers or gardeners on the call?
And if you would consider yourself a farmer or gardener, press 1 on your keypad. And if not, press 2.
just going to wait for the response.
Yeah,
there.
we're waiting for people. So again, press 1 if you would consider yourself a farmer or gardener. It's your own definition, or 2 if not. And so 62% said yes. 75% said yes, 12% said no.
Okay.
So that's
and then
the first one.
Yeah, that's a lot of people growing stuff. And the next question is just, would you consider yourself a social justice activist? So not environmental justice, but just social justice.
Okay, so if you would consider yourself a social justice activist, press 1 and add. If not, press 2. So again, same. 75% would say yes, and 12% would say they are not.
Okay, great. And I just have one other question, and that is, I know that people's time is really important to them. So I really wanted to see if I couldn't get a sense of what people were wanting to get out of today's call, what topics they're really interested in having me cover. There's a lot of different things I could talk about. So if 1 or 2 people would like to, speak up, there's something that really is burning they'd like to hear about or talk about, I'd really appreciate the feedback.
Great. So I hope someone here will break the ice and express what it is that you can imagine Doria could add to your toolkit. What are you interested in hearing from her today? Marissa?
Hi, Doria. This is Marissa here in the Transition U.S. office as well. I've heard you speak a bit and also read your interview with Rob and really admire the work that Urban Tilth is doing. And I heard you say in your interview with Rob, the importance of providing livelihoods to people to build community resilience, and I know that's part of your model. I'm curious about the model, where does your funding come from, or how are you able to support people, provide jobs for people to be growing food? And I'm also curious about Cooperation Richmond, which I've heard just a little bit about and I think is tied into the livelihoods piece.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm going to definitely focus on those aspects then when we get into the presentation. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Anybody else just burning to add something?
Yeah, let's see. I don't have any other hands up. Here's another one. Nils, go ahead.
Hello, my name's Nils. I'm actually also with the Transition U.S. organization. I'm calling in remotely today. And I'm also emerging as a congressional candidate for the House of Representatives here in Northern California. And quite apart from that, I'm excited about the Bernie campaign. I'm excited about the idea of actually, when we say scaling up community resilience, that's what it's all about. And not waiting for government, not waiting for big business, none of that. We got to do it ourselves. But my question is, if we could imagine shooting for the moon, if we actually imagining having taken back the government, for the people and by the people, how could we see? I've been following Urban Tilth, and how can we leverage these kinds of models and really scale it up in a huge way in the coming decades? As we really get grooving. So kind of just the 30,000-foot view. Where can we see this really going and scaling up with deep government support if we really take it back to the people? When we?
Yeah, when we. When we. Okay, great. Okay, so I'm gonna jump in, and here's what I'm gonna do. I have this presentation. It's giving you a background so everyone, if you haven't read interviews about Urban Tilth or anything like that, you have a basic understanding of where I'm coming from and what Urban Tilth is. But I'm gonna kind of speed through it so I can get into kind of the work we're doing now and where we are now. We're kind of at this really interesting moment in time for Urban Tilth. Urban Tilth is 10 years old last year. For a completely community-run organization run by, very low-income people of color in Richmond. That's a huge feat, being 10 years old. And it's kind of like that was the first 10 years was kind of the first book of Urban Tilth. And now we're starting to write the second book of Urban Tilth. And a lot of it is focused on the economics of making the model that we've kind of piloted over the first 10 years really actually work, and scaling it up, trying to figure out those economics, trying to figure out, how do we actually move into the world of just transition away from fossil fuels, and towards, right livelihoods for everyone, not just for people who can afford to be alternative. So I'm kind of flipping through the PowerPoint that I sent out. It's actually in a PDF form, but it's a PowerPoint. Starting with this first page, and just to say that, like I just said, Urban Tilth is an urban agriculture organization based in Richmond, completely run by Richmond residents. We have 19 staff year-round. We've ballooned up to 65 staff in the summertime when we have all the gardens and the youth programs going and everything kind of in full bloom. Most of our staff have come through our program, so they've started with us, as sophomores or juniors in high school, and actually grown into positions where they're managing farms and other projects, 6, 7, 8 years later. We're all Richmond residents, which is something that's really unusual for a nonprofit organization that's serving an underserved community. Usually it's folks from other communities from other cities to come in and try to, help people who are underserved. And I think maybe that's the first point that I want to make in terms of our model that's really different, is that, we saw early on that a nonprofit is a vehicle. It's a tool you use to get something done. And the way that the nonprofit tool had been used in the past is, other people come in to try to serve a community. When we looked at the economics of that, we saw that 60-70% of the budget of a nonprofit goes to the staff members who run that nonprofit. So when people give money to a nonprofit, 50-70% is going to the staffing and not directly to the community that they're trying to serve. And we said, okay, one way that we can really not just grow food, which is, and get food out to people, which is our mission, but do that so it deeply serves the community, is to hire and train people from that community so that 60 or 70% of our budget is actually being cycled within our community. Those dollars are being cycled within our community and not going out to pay mortgages and bills and other more affluent communities. So that was one of the first key points, and kind of, it became a very political kind of statement, even though at the time we were just thinking, so many people in Richmond really need work, like any work. And so this is just a small thing that we could do. And over the years, holding that line has been really political, actually. If you flip to the second slide, you see a lovely picture of our Chevron refinery on fire. This is the other key aspect of doing this work in Richmond, is I'm literally sitting in my house on 12th Street, which is 12 blocks from the Chevron refinery. When the refinery blew up a few years back, I could see the fire from my front porch. It was so big. The sky went black, and the sirens are going off, and it's like we're under attack, And this isn't the first time this happened. It's not the first time I lived through it. I can remember at least 3 other occasions where similar things have happened. So we live, and actually right before this call started, we have our normal Wednesday 11 o'clock siren that happens, and kind of throughout the community this kind of emergency siren goes off just to make sure the system is working. And so it's a really particular context that we're living in. And this factory came before the city. It's over 100 years old. The people came afterwards to work in the majority of the people came afterwards to work in the shipyard. And so it's a really interesting relationship. It's a city politically, historically, really owned by the corporation, a corporate town. There's been massive battles over the last 10 years with the Green Party and other progressives, the Richmond Progressive Alliance, to change that dynamic, and a lot of wins there in Richmond, including the last election where the slate of Chevron candidates were defeated, even though they were massively had so much more money than the progressive candidates did. All of their entire slate was defeated. And, a huge win for the community against the corporation. It never has ever happened in Richmond before. And so if you look to the next slide, you can see that, Richmond has really inherited a lot of other things. After the war, there was this huge buildup of industry and and people, a huge explosion of population. And after the war ended, the World War II, there wasn't any plan for dealing with, getting people into other jobs or, dealing with the economy, having an economy that wasn't based on wartime economy. So it just started a decline that just became more and more pronounced over time. Although Chevron is the largest employer technically in Richmond, they employ very few Richmond residents. The industry is dirty, and that it accounts for like 2,000 folks. Which in a city of 130,000, that leaves a lot of people out of work, primarily African American and Latino people, either completely out of work or painfully underemployed. On top of that, the city is also, technically one of these food deserts that isn't a food desert in the sense that there's no food, but rather there's a cornucopia of junk food, and it's really difficult to find any healthy whole foods around. And just kind of a real breakdown in the economy. Very, not a lot of access for people. I mean, we deal with a lot of youth in the city through our programs at Richmond High School. We have an Urban Agriculture and American Food Systems class that we've been teaching there for 9 years. They operate a garden and a farm and a nursery, and they grow food and distribute that to the folks in their community. When we talk to them about what kind of jobs they see themselves having, if they're not on a college track, people are aspiring to have a job at Walmart or Target because they pay a little better than Walmart, or Taco Bell. It's depressing, the lack of opportunity and the lack of access that thousands of kids are facing. And so we have all of this kind of really intense situation that we faced, and we looked around ourselves and said, okay, where are our assets? We know the things that are difficult, the things that we need to change. We need jobs. We need whole foods. We need access to opportunity. How do we create opportunities out of these challenges? And so we looked around and saw, not only did we have all these other things, we also had a lot of vacant land, and people who were unemployed were actually available to possibly do something else. And we started to put all those things together and reimagine the landscape we were living in, so that vacant lot becomes a cornfield. So actually on the next slide, this is a picture of one of the areas of Adams Crest Farm when we were growing corn there. Adams Crest Farm is actually an abandoned middle school in the foothills of Richmond. It's a middle school that was built on an earthquake fault, so it had to be shut down. And the upper field, which is just under an acre, was just, kind of overgrown, and the school district was, mowing the lawn there and spending a lot of energy trying to maintain that spot. And we took it over and made it our first urban farm, and growing corn there. And so all of the 13 different school and community gardens that we run and maintain or have helped to start in Richmond were all on public land, either owned by the school district, the county, the city, and they were all places that were not being used. They were underused locations. They were blighted. There were places that were dumping grounds. There are places that are magnets for illicit activities, and sometimes continue to be magnets for illicit activities, and we kind of struggle against that. And so that's another kind of part of our model, is where we look at things in our community that should be false and take them on as challenges and opportunities for change. And use them as really a teaching moment. There's nothing more empowering for a youth to come into a program where there's a vacant lot that just looks like nothing, and on the course of 6 weeks or 8 months or 8 years, you transform that into a thriving garden that produces food that they can give to people that they know, that helps them get through the month, or helps them, make a special meal, or, helps them do something different, or that actually becomes something that they could sell at a market stand. And then all of a sudden, refuse becomes a way out. I think another part of our model, if you kind of go to the next slide, is people. Like, these are 4 images of 4 youth who were in our 2013 Summer Apprentice Program. We have a Summer Youth Apprentice Program that we run every year for 9 years. It's 40 youth, an intensive training program for 6 weeks, 100 hours. They all work in a particular garden or farm and really understand the system of that garden or farm during that time, and participate in growing, and they participate in our farm stands, and kind of a little bit of a introduction to the kind of small business. And one of the things that program is doing, besides helping us grow food through the summer, which is our highest kind of season, of course, for any farmer it is it gives each one of those 40 youth a chance to be somebody, to have a name, to be recognized, to not be a random statistic in the city of Richmond, where they just, are part of some sad, story, and they don't have a history, they don't have a name or a family or dreams or ambitions. We make it our mission to actually get to know everybody, get to know Karen, and get to know, everyone who comes into our frame. The frame of Urban Tilth becomes a part of this kind of Urban Tilth family, where you kind of transition from anonymity to being a part of a community, and go through the process of learning what leadership is, and learning that leadership comes with the necessity of learning real skills. Because just being a good talker isn't good enough to be a leader. You actually have to know how to do something and have what you're talking about be based in real knowledge. And so creating space for youth to become active members of a civic community is one of the kind of underlying functions of our urban ag program, and really underscoring that we aren't statistics, which is the next slide. Not only to the kids in the program, but to everyone who's watching the program from the outside, is that there are thousands of kids growing up in Richmond who are not shooters, who are not on drugs, who are not, who are actually wanting to do something else with their lives, but just don't have the opportunity to do it. I think that there's this sense that when people are making less than $20,000 a year, less than $12,000 a year, that there's something wrong with them, and that they're like, you can't help them, or there's just, they don't want to be helped. I've had that before. I was actually at a class, and the question was asked was, aren't some of these people, they just don't, what do you do with the people who just can't be helped, or they don't want to be helped? And my answer to them was, most of the people that I live next to, one, they work, and they're just not really, really poorly paid for the work that they do. And two, if they don't work, or if they're not working, they want to be working. They want to be a part of their own solution. They do not want to be victims of their own circumstance, which is kind of our next slide. We get all kinds of people participating in our garden projects. People wanting to be active if they've had an injury on the job, or if they've had some kind of other thing that's keeping them out of the mainstream world. They want to be a part of a community. They want their lives to matter, and they want to be self-supporting. And I think that what Urban Tilth has done is created a place where they can sort that out and possibly re-enter into a world that it wants them. And so, creating opportunity is a huge part of what we do, reframing science, using agriculture actually to get people open up again to science and thinking about what are the drivers in our environment? How does this world work? We've kind of been spoiled by, especially in kind of minority, low-income communities, been spoiled to science because of the way it's taught in school. It's like deadening. You just memorize this and spit out that, and it doesn't encourage you to look at kind of the awe that science is trying to investigate. The intricacy of the systems, the way that we can be an actor in those systems. That's the kind of magic and awe we try to bring back to just looking at our immediate environments. You say that one of the things I always love to do when I'm working with the folks in our programs is I like to stand on some decimated asphalt space and say, well, there's nature all around us. It's just covered up and we can't see it. But it's stronger than us. It's older than us. And if we just give it room, it will come back, and we can help in that process. We can nurture and restore the spaces that we're living in, and we can actually reimagine the spaces that we're living in. So if you kind of move forward through the slides, there's some picture of a woman with a bunch of native plants that we were planting, and we actually were making bouquets of flowers and things that we had planted, and teaching about natives and creating, kind of communities for, our plants and animals, not just for ourselves, that we can create habitat through our gardens, and we can, actually bring other beings back into our lives and not be so separated in these urban landscapes, that the way that we've kind of created our cities doesn't have to be the way that we live in cities going forward. This is one model, one model of how cities have been created, and we can question that model, and we can break concrete, and we can, bring back the natives, and we can plant them, we can nurture them, we can, be okay with bees and other animals, cohabitating with us. We have to learn about it. We have to figure out how to do that. But as we know, we're not stuck in the world that we've inherited. So again, just kind of transforming these spaces, taking dead ends around our creeks and, putting a garden there as a symbol of the relationship that we really want to have with wild spaces, is a co-conspirator, a collaborator with nature, rather than, somebody who just dumps on it or tries to cover it up and put it in a culvert. And reclaiming public space, because, I think one thing that happens a lot in low-income communities is the public is seen as private by the people who live there. Public spaces are not necessarily, there isn't a sense of, I'm forgetting the word I'm looking for, entitlement to public space. In more affluent communities, you have a real sense of entitlement to public space, that public space is for them, for the people who live there, and that they're going to take ownership of it in a way of stewarding that space, in a way of, being a part of that space. I think that in lower income communities, it's not that way. It's seen as a space that's policed by the people who own it, which is the city, which is, the police, which is the other people, and not us. And I think that's one of the other things that Urban Tilth has really worked on changing, is taking back that sense of collective ownership and seeing ourselves in the public domain as actors. And kind of the other slides are just, making sure that we're making learning really central. I mean, I think that when I look forward into the next 10 years, I see this huge challenge of climate change and the desperate need for us to just move away from not just petroleum and the actual material of petroleum, but the whole mindset, the capitalist mindset that comes with and drives the propagation of that product and kind of in everything we do. When I look forward, I feel like the only way we're really going to get out of here is that people need to be active members, active participants in society. This sense of being passive consumers is a part of the problem. So turning people back on, like kind of been turned off, turning people back on so that they're learners, so that they're thinking about, how they can produce a yield, by being in collaboration with systems of the world, is something that we do actively, purposefully. We can't make the just transition with passive participants. And interacting with wild spaces, with natural spaces. We started a watershed restoration technician program this year based on our youth apprentice model, where we take a group of young people just graduated from high school, not on a college track, and teaching them watershed restoration tools to basically be there as we're making this transition to green infrastructure in all of our schools in response to the Clean Water Act, bringing in rain gardens and other things to treat our stormwater runoff and our flood control channels. We need people to actually maintain those spaces because they're natural spaces. They're not in big national parks where nature can kind of take care of themselves, but they're actually kind of, gardens. They're like gardens along streetscapes and along, flood control channels. And they need people there to be in collaboration with the plants and animals. And actually, when you restore a creek and naturalize the banks, because it isn't in a larger system, you need somebody to come in and, make sure that they aren't overgrowing and kind of monitor species and whatnot. Actually, if you kind of look back to the way Native Americans, participated in the landscape. There's a great book called Before the Wilderness that kind of goes into this. It was a collaboration, a participatory process. There weren't people who, believed in this notion of wilderness. And so kind of we've been starting programs like Basins of Relations, the Watershed Training Program to, reintroduce that idea and that the importance of interacting with nature everywhere it is, including in our cities. And then, over the last maybe 2, 3, 4 years, we've been looking more and more at how to make, a larger impact than what we're doing. We make a brilliant, beautiful impact in this kind of concentric circles around each one of these 13 different school and community gardens, of all the community members that directly impacted right around the gardens. But we looked out and we said, okay, that's great. It's like 10,000 people a year that we're really profoundly impacting. That's awesome. But there are 130,000 people in the city. How do we make a deeper impact? So, but 3 years ago, we helped create the Richmond Food Policy Council with the then Mayor Gail McLaughlin. And one of the first projects that we took on was, kind of a simple fix is, in order to get more fruits and vegetables into the 52,000 students in our school district, one easy way to do that is just to offer them. We don't offer them now. When we first started, there were no salad bars in the Richmond schools. Everything they got was something that was warmed up, kind of a prepackaged processed food warmed up and served. And the fruit, if they got it, was poorly managed, bananas in the refrigerator type of thing, and, pears that weren't ripe. So we actually started a campaign, a Healthy School Food campaign, to install salad bars in all of the Richmond schools, making our first wins last year, where we got the first 2 salad bars in 2 of the most impacted schools, actually. It's a huge hit. Parents love it. They like to go and eat at the salad bar. And it's a way that we're actually getting whole foods into the schools. And I think the key to this particular project is not just that we're getting these salad bars there and that's cool and it's great, but it actually, requesting and demanding salad bars also requests and demands the back end to support whole, healthy food distribution and processing within the school district. once that back end before 2 years ago did not exist. There was no ways of ordering that food. There was no ways of storing that food. There was no ways of preparing that food according to food codes. So in order to demand one salad bar, you actually have to, it also incurs the demand that they create the back end. And once the back end is created, there's all kinds of other things that we can ask for, like local procurement, like organic food. But until we have that back end even to support any whole fresh foods, we can't demand the others. So, one of the things that I'm kind of proud of at Urban Tilth is that, we really, because I think we're Richmond residents, we're here kind of for the long run, we take a long-term view. And 1 or 2 salad bars today is, an organic, locally, sourced food hub, 10 years, 5 years from now. And that's what we're thinking. It's in the back of our minds. That's where we're pushing. Because one of the things we realized by, starting these small urban farms is that not only do you need to work on the culture change to get people to eat the food, any whole food, and then, kind of local on top of that, and broaching the topic of climate change, but you also, if you want to scale it up so that it becomes economically viable, you need to have places, systems in place to distribute the volumes that you need to make it work, right? And so the Richmond Food Policy Council, is looking on kind of that scale of the gardens are great, the farms are great. In order to go bigger, we first need to also think about market. Where would this eventual larger scaling up operation go? Who would it feed? How would we get it there? How would we store it? So anyway, trying to make connections and make plans. We've had a lot of impact over the years. I kind of talked about that. 48,000 program participants, 377 people employed through our nonprofit, at 10 to 18.50 an hour. It's not a lot, but for this community, it's saved people's houses. It's helped people go to college. It's been huge. It's more than what they pay at Target. And just a sense of empowerment that comes from, us, the people who live here, being our own solutions. And like one of the kind of speakers earlier said, just not waiting for someone else to drop in and save us. Just tired of that whole dynamic, tired of that whole paradigm, and really empowered when you can actually be in a position to do for yourselves. Not as, kind of bootstrappers. This is not what I'm talking about. But rather, kind of collectively taking care of each other, collectively managing assets so that they benefit and improve conditions for everyone who's living in a community. As we move forward, keeping the focus on teaching youth and making sure our gardens are using the best principles possible, making sure that everyone understands that, there's no throwaway people, no throwaway land. And I say that pretty clearly, like one of the things kind of wrapping back to the opening that we find living in an urban community is that land has been really decimated. Like the soils that we're living on are really decimated. People, I think, forget that soil is supposed to be alive, alive with all kinds of, millions of microorganisms. And what we've done, with our kind of industrial approach and our urban, mindsets is just kill everything for all kinds of reasons. And one of the things that we do at Urban Tilth is kind of reverse that and say, no, we need to bring life back life back to even these most decimated soils. It can be done. You know, nature is so resilient. And if we can recognize that we're part of that, that we are as resilient as nature, we are part of nature, we are nature, that we can bring the fertility and life back to our own selves, our own ways, and the soils that we're living in, I feel like we can have a way forward. It's been really powerful working with all of the youth here. They're extremely inspiring. In the news, you always hear about youth who've done crazy things, that small, tiny minority of youth who've really just lost their way and are shooting people and doing crazy stuff. You don't hear about the other, 97% who, are brilliant, bright, who want something for themselves. That's the light that I think we bring, as well as all of these little, particular, very purposeful methods of running this vehicle. We're at kind of at the second to last slide now, and this slide is called Opportunity. It's a little slide of the North Richmond Farm Project. It will be our largest farm, 3 acres. A good portion of the project space is actually will be housing entrepreneurial projects, kind of collective entrepreneurial projects, a cafe, a bike shop, market stand, a farm stand. In this particular area of Richmond, there is no access to healthy whole foods. The only 2 actual businesses are 2 convenience stores, 1 liquor store, 1 convenience store that sell chips and crap. And that's it. There's no other businesses at all in this area of the community. And so, we're at this incredible moment where Urban Tilth has answered the question of whether or not people want to eat fruits and vegetables. Of course they do. Whether or not they want to live a healthier life. Of course they do. Whether or not they would be interested in being a part of the solutions, moving towards solutions around climate change, around, living in within our carrying capacity. And of course they do, especially when they understand what's at stake. All those questions are a definite yes. And the question now is, how do we do this? How do we take it from, the 200 people around the garden to the 2,000 people, surrounding that, or the 130,000 people around that? How do we break into the, $6 million market of fresh produce that's sold within Richmond every year and divert some of those resources to supporting local, hyper-local, like we like to say, agriculture, and creating opportunities for people in the process. This is where you kind of enter Cooperation Richmond and enter kind of the next phase of what we're working on. And Cooperation Richmond is a cooperative incubator project that was started by Foresta and myself. The idea was that, we have a lot of people in Richmond who want to do something more. They don't want to work for Target all their lives. They have minds, they have ideas. They don't have capital. They don't have necessarily training in small businesses. Some do, especially immigrants, but the vast majority of folks living here don't. They might have an idea and they might have skills. And collectively, if they come together with other people who have similar ideas and skills, they could create enterprises that could lift them all up. So we're working on creating an incubator that would coach worker-owned cooperative businesses so that they can be successful. Starting from, the idea to becoming a kind of legal cooperative entity, helping them with basic business things like how to set up your accounting system and making sure you have a solid business plan where you're actually going to be self-sustaining. and getting them enough capital. This is the key to Cooperation Richmond. Is one of the things that low-income communities, when they start businesses, usually don't have, and almost always just secures their failure unless they're really, really hardworking and creative and lucky, is not having enough capital. So we've kind of partnered with an organization called the Working World. It's had a history of helping to start cooperative enterprises in Argentina and other places around the world, and converting very large businesses to cooperatives in the United States, and then helping to spur cooperatives around. They have access to capital, and they're currently exploring partnering with the divestment movement, the divestment from fossil fuels movement that's been kind of moving across college campuses, asking college and universities to divest from petroleum products and reinvest in more sustainable, climate-friendly industries. The ask is that during that reinvestment process, that they take a little bit of those millions of dollars in funds and put some aside for the creation of worker-owned cooperatives within a whole selection of target communities across the United States. And that is one of the things that we've been working on for the last year, is making that ask and building the partnership with that investment movement to see that happen. Capital is really this thing that we have to struggle with. When you are in a low-income communities, it's not just that people don't have jobs; it's that they don't have wealth. They don't have assets. They don't have a safety net to fall back on. So I feel like in order to make this transition that we need to make in a just way, we have to look at the creation of real wealth. And I'm not talking about bullying and dollars and whatnot. I'm talking about, collectively securing, I should say, assets. And, the access to the amount of resources people would need, so that the projects that we're thinking of to move, from the old way of doing things to the new aren't just for, me and my friends, but are for, me and my community. That takes capital. If we want to make a food hub that's going to serve the West Contra Costa Unified School District, that involves real estate. That involves figuring out how to move that food around. That involves figuring out how to hold that food at proper temperatures. Even though we're local, it's not likely that having locally grown food going directly to a school is going to go from the farm to the school plate. That's not going to happen. There's going to be steps in between. And in order to make those steps happen, we need access to capital. So I'm kind of going to end it there. I can talk about any kinds of things people want to ask questions. There's so much more to talk about. But that's really where we're working on this next kind of 10 years, is how do we take all of this knowledge and enthusiasm and apply it, to serving our whole community, not just this small family that we've created.
Doria, thank you. I'm so impressed that all of the work you're doing, but also just getting a sense of even the salad bar and that whole back end that needs to happen to have the salad bar come into a school, and to just get a sense of that success and getting all that accomplished, and just so excited about Cooperation Richmond and just the North Richmond Farm Project. Oh, these things could be such models in other parts of the country and the world. It's just really juicy and exciting. So thank you for all this great work.
Thank you.
I did want to open it for questions for people. Questions, comments. Press 1 on your keypad, and let's take this conversation to another level. So yeah, just let's hear from someone. We'll start with Marissa. Go ahead.
Am I on? Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Doria. I just wanted to ask if you have specific tips for working with young people and specifically kind of cultivating and supporting youth leadership, which I think we could do a better job at in transition.
Right. Well, honestly, the way that Urban Tilth is engaged with youth is actually employing youth who are a little older to lead in that. Peer-to-peer teaching, peer-to-peer mentoring is our model. That's how we do it. It's funny sometimes when we have pictures of the summer apprentice program, you know, people are like, where are the staff? How come there's no staff in your summer apprentice program pictures? And I'm like, they're there. They just look like the youth. And I think that that's really key. We started really small with this small group of youth in our first apprentice program and, you know, poured just a ton of energy and love and attention into their development and, you know, kept that going along the years, and then they turned around and gave the same back to the folks that were coming up behind them. And that's our model. We continue to do that today. The summer apprentice program is actually structured, and the way that we actually are, you know, get it funded from the foundations is to present it as this 3-tiered training process. So the apprentices who are in the actual program is 1 tier of training. Then we have something called seconds, who are, you know, they were apprentices, you know, a year ago, and they're coming back, and they are basically, you know, shadowing the staff to learn what the staff are doing to make the program happen. And then there are crew leads who have been, you know, 3 years removed from being through the training program and, you know, really understand the values of Urban Tilth, have gone to other trainings, and they're able to lead. They actually have the knowledge to lead. And then there's kind of an assistant that works with the lead who's 2 years removed from the program. So it's this kind of, you know, progressive levels of engagement, progressive levels of responsibility. You take on a little bit of more responsibility at each level, and ultimately you become the person who is determining structure and implementation of the program.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's really great. I have a question, then we'll go to another of our participants. Is Doria, I know you're familiar with the transition movement. We talked about this just at the before the call started, and you were on the same stage as Rob Hopkins, a co-founder of the Transition Movement. You were interviewed by him. You've participated in the Northern California Transition and Permaculture Convergences, and just wondering what suggestions you might have to make the transition work more relevant to more people, or conversely to help the transitioners, the transition leaders understand and support all of this great work, like this great work that you're doing. What's the bridge? What are the avenues that we might employ to just better support all of this resilience building?
Right. You know, so we're Urban Tilth and myself are part of a kind of a larger collection of folks, kind of led by Movement Generation Justice and Ecology Project, kind of the Our Power campaign. It's got multiple locations across the United States, and it's kind of looking at transition away from fossil fuels within communities of color, and what would a just transition, you know, look like, and kind of adding just in there to say that we are asking that folks in the transition movement not kind of do that science, that kind of sad scientific thing of as extracting a problem and looking at it as if it exists by itself in a vacuum. That, you know, climate change is something that could exist by itself and exist in a vacuum. It's only because of, you know, the way we've lived as humans on the earth and whatnot, but rather look that there's all these different interconnected social systems that are driving that phenomena. And one of those interconnected social systems, you know, driving this phenomena that's gotten us where we are in terms of climate change is social injustice, social and economic injustice. They're actually an integral part of, I believe, the capitalist model. And just to take a little moment, I want to just pull aside for a second and say, you know, I have serious problems with capitalism, with the way that, you know, this constant drive towards ever-increasing profit is completely unsustainable. I don't have a problem with markets, with people trading goods and services and you know, and being able to live. The notion that we can have ever-increasing profit is not in alignment with having one earth, and that's the problem I have with capitalism. So in order to have that model, you have to set up social systems where people will bear the brunt of its instability, its unsustainability, and ultimately those people have been black and brown people across the globe, or low-income people who don't have access to power. And so what I think what folks like me who are kind of growing up in underserved communities are wanting to hear from transition movements is this larger understanding of how we got here. That includes the escape, the pressure valve of low-income communities of color in the system. You know, we have been the pressure valve of this unsustainable system. It's played out on our bodies. It's played out on our communities. It drives, you know, the stress and strain that we're under. We're part of this, and just dealing with CO2 emissions in a vacuum isn't enough. Like, we also need to look at the real people who are affected by this. And the real people, if we really want to change the system, we have to change the social dynamics as well. Like, if we really want to change those emissions, we have to change the social dynamics that are driving them. And I think that's what you know, people who are doing the work that I'm doing really would love to hear more of from people within the transition movement, to say that, yes, we need to focus on emissions, but we have to focus on them in context. We have to stop extracting them from context.
Great, thank you. I totally hear you, and welcome also suggestions as we find our way. So really appreciate your frankness, and definitely take it to heart, as I'm sure we all do. We have another question or comment here, and I'm going to say I don't know how to pronounce your name. Frank?
Is that me?
Yeah, please.
Is that me? Can I talk?
Yes, please do.
Okay. Well, I'm up in Canada, Vancouver, and I was just helping one of my neighbors dig up his. I don't know if they're canna lilies or calla lilies, but he has to dig them up because they freeze. But he tells me he gets 20% increase every year, so he gives them to his local church, and they sell them at their spring garden sales.
Right.
And I was thinking, if you transition movement found a bunch of Doria's apprentices and then gave them a $20 budget to buy some plants to propagate in their neighborhood, to share with their neighbors, that gives you a real feeling of accomplishment. And I know that peonies are used in Chinese medicine, so why don't you give Doria a budget of $500 or $1,000 for our community to start planting their local gardens, and they can spin that into something that's going to grow by 20% a year.
Right. Well, thank you for the suggestion, Doria.
It's great. I actually love that. We started the small business part of the apprentice program kind of as a result of, realizing how much excess comes from gardening. And we're like, we got to do something with this because, not all of it gets distributed and eaten. And especially when it comes to fruit trees, one year we had a neighbor's fruit tree so full of fruit. This was the fruit tree they had inherited on the property. So full of fruit that the trunk of the tree actually split in half because it was just too heavy with fruit and hadn't been taken care of. And what we did was we got the apprentices together, we picked up all the fruit, and we made tons of jam. And we sold the jam. And then we actually had them calculate, how much we should sell it for and what size bottles and, the cost of the ingredients and whatnot. And, took the profit from that and actually paid for the annual camping trip that year. And just seeing, the importance of not having waste and rethinking our waste. And, it was a little bit of input in order to have a huge output. And again, that's the capital, right? We actually needed to have the resource to be able to buy the jars and put the labels on and whatnot so we can charge the amount of money that we wanted to charge and, get the proper permit and all these kinds of things. It's just that little bit of capital that you need in order, kind of in relationship to the yield you're trying to produce. That's where we're at trying to figure out now. Like how do we really feed these projects?
Well, thank you. I think we have one more question, and then Doria, I'll ask you for some closing remarks, and we'll wind up. So Victoria, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Hey, Doria. This is Victoria Morton. I'm based in New Orleans, Louisiana, and I work with Veggie Farmers Cooperative. And I have 3 questions. I don't know if you have time for 3, or should I just choose one?
Sure. Go ahead.
Hello?
Yeah. Go for it.
Okay. So I was wondering what Urban Tilth's financial model is, like what sources are covering, like what proportion of different sources are covering your operational costs.
Right.
So all 3 questions, and then we'll leave it to Doria.
Okay.
What are the other 2 questions?
Okay. And then the second one is, I was wondering what Urban Tilth's relationship to land is, like what the process of accessing your current sites was like. And then the third question was, sorry?
Go ahead. I'm just emoting.
And then the third question was, how have and how are you looking to increase the sustainability of how Urban Tilth is operating?
I didn't get the last question. How did you say it again?
How have and how are you currently looking to increase the sustainability of Urban Tilth's operation?
Right. So I'm going to start with that one and work backwards. So off the bat, really clearly, Urban Tilth is a nonprofit organization run by philanthropy, run by foundations and grants. We've been slowly incorporating more entrepreneurial projects that are taking the burden of all of our fundraising, off of grants and individual giving. But it's been a really slow process, mostly because in order to, again, operate at the scale where we could be completely self-sustaining, we need a lot more capital. So just as a for instance, one of the things we want to do is scale up the Farm to Table CSA and, offer it to more people. In order to do that, we actually need cold storage. We actually need, in order to, be, legal with moving food around and providing food to people at that scale, where it's not just kind of picked and then in a farm stand type of thing. And we don't have access to that capital to scale it up so that we could. If we could, it would make our major farm project, the Adams Crest Farm, self-sustaining. Like our business model, predicts that we could be self-sustaining just by scaling up the members in our CSA. But we have this barrier of not having the proper tools, the proper assets in place to make that leap. So we're looking for those assets. What we want to do is actually start moving away from a primary nonprofit model at this stage and start spinning out these collective entrepreneurial projects that are self-sustaining using Cooperation Richmond. Because we feel like that's the only way we're going to be able to actually get to the scale of transition that we need to make an impact on many people's lives and not just a small amount of people. So right now we're, 90% grant driven. 10% is from, kind of our products and services. And we're just trying to move in that direction of being, more and more self-sustaining, with products and services. And kind of, we would like for the nonprofit to move back into the realm of kind of education, which is something that the product is the opening and turning on of minds. And so until and unless the school district really values what we do and gives us contracts for teaching that stuff, it's going to have to be driven by foundations to pay for that education. So that's where we're looking over the next 10 years, is to really have the education programs housed under the nonprofit and have these more independent collectives running the food production and distribution things, and still, doing the training and the teaching that we do, but in the context of these businesses. So still having youth that come in every year, still having people from the community being hired and trained, but being hired and trained to get, to produce food and whatnot for people to eat. And then the question that was in the middle, what was the second question again? Access to land. So that's a great question. All the different places that we have different access agreements. And I have to roll back and say that almost every location that we got access to didn't have formal agreements in place when we first started. It was a very much so of, somebody with a key, some teacher, somebody, thought it was a great idea and gave us access, not the administrations or the legal entities that own the land. Over time, we've gotten into legal agreements with folks, with the district. We have site access agreements with the county. We actually worked really long, about a year and a half, to get for the North Richmond farm site, the 3-acre farm site. We negotiated with the help of Supervisor John Joya, a 30-year lease, long-term lease with them, at $500 a year for accessing that land. So it's a 10-year renewable, automatically renewable lease 3 times, so 30 years total. And that was a long haul. It was literally a year of negotiations, a year of prep, and it was not for the faint-hearted. Not that people were being mean or anything like that or difficult. It was just very bureaucratic and lots of hoops to jump through. But now we've got this farm location that we can build what we need to build on for the next 30 years, as long as we keep up the terms of our agreement, which are basic and understandable. So it goes from everything from adopt a spots with city parks, where we just do a simple form and we adopt a location in the park and then take care of it by creating a garden, to site access agreements, a little bit more legal language and whatnot, to a formal lease for land. And again, all the sites, almost all the sites, I should say, started with just some person who had enough access giving us access. And then we cultivate a relationship from there.
Wow, thank you, Doria. You've given a lot of information and just such great examples from the work you're doing. And just wondered if you had any last closing thoughts, and then we'll adjourn.
right? I mean, I think, especially speaking to Transition US, which is, you know, something, that transition has really been on my mind lately, just kind of wandering around in my community thinking about all the things we're doing that we need to stop doing and all the work that needs to be done. I really look to the transition movement to question, like, how can we broaden this movement? How can we understand that economy is the thing that we really need to be working on, and understanding again how do we care for our home, right? Economy is kind of, you know, at its essence the taking care of our home, like taking care of our home environment. So how do we do this? And that includes people, and it includes jobs, and it includes democratic governance, you know, of everything that we do. And it includes, like, questioning the whole notion of a job, you know. I think that we could really do with some philosophical wrangling with the kind of concepts that we just accept. So that when we're thinking about solutions, we're thinking about solutions in context. We're thinking about systemic solutions, and not kind of one-off, independent, or extremely small-scale, without repercussions solutions. I'm all for, you know, it starts with me, like, you know, definitely somebody who acts local and thinks global, but I also need to be acting local in a way that understands how our social systems and social understandings of who we are and how we are in the world, the actor that we are, impacts larger systems. So that's kind of just where my mind is these days, is, you know, how do we do this just transition so that the person who is relegated to working in Walmart understands that fighting for $15 an hour is definitely something that we understand and support, but also can take into context the impact that Walmart has in terms of its global distribution network and the way that the products are created and the waste that's created from the entire enterprise. And how can we interact with that kind of worker who's fighting for their rights and say, you know, yes, we support you in your right to have enough livelihood to thrive, and let's have this larger conversation about the world we need. And maybe that world is a world without that whole construct. I think that that's the thing that excites me. That's the thing I feel like that's the next step. That's the next 10 years, is to work at that place where there's such strain and stress and have it be $15 an hour, and why don't you guys be the worker owners, and can we sell something that's more sustainable? Can we go about this business in a more sustainable way? That moves us towards, you know, reversing climate change. You know, is the democratic, making workplaces democratic, making, you know, turning people on, turning the workers on, and having them be a part of the solution, and working at those places where there's already strain, where the system is weak. I think that you know, that's the next 10 years, and I'm hoping to, you know, be working there. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, thank you, and maybe we can convene a conversation like that in the Bay Area. That would be rich.
Right,
and
I think so.
Yeah, so thank you so much, and thank you, participants. And really, really, this is the beginning of obviously a longer conversation that needs to happen. And thank you, Doria, for pointing out some of the directions to really rethink into, and just look forward to advancing just the whole conversation about how we live on the earth with all of us being just and fairly treated. So onward we go, and we'll adjourn today, and just much thank you to everyone, and we'll sign off.